Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Imperfect Podcast. My name is Kirsten Pfeiffer, and today I am joined by a dear family friend and just a wonderful person. His name is Father Martin Padovani, and he is a priest, psychotherapist, speaker, and author. He's been a priest for over 60 years and has his master's degree in counseling. In his counseling ministry, he has had a great impact providing marriage counseling and helping people deal with psychological problems. And I'm really excited. Anyone that has listened to this podcast knows I'm such a psychology nerd, and my faith is also very important to me. And obviously, Father Padovani is just great at really examining the intersection of those two because of his experience and because of his work as an author. He has two books. One is called Healing Wounded Emotions, and the other is called Healing Wounded Relationships. So we're going to get into both of those today. But I just want to give a warm welcome to Father Padovani. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Kirsten. I'm honored because I think one of the most exciting things I feel today is the fact that you are reaching the people your age, not only in California, but all over. And I think that's a wonderful group that you're dealing with because they are our future. And I think what you're offering them is wonderful. God bless you for that. The Lord is going to walk with you and bless you the whole way.
Oh, thank you so much. And I said this to you before, and I'm going to say it again. I can only do this work, and my generation can only do this work because of the work that people like yourself have done, and we stand on the shoulders of giants. And so even this week when I was reviewing your books again and just getting able to sink my teeth into your decades of counseling experience and your ministry, and it's just such a gift to be able to have that roadmap, so to speak. And so I'm really excited to talk to you about it. Do you want to first get started by telling listeners what led you to write those two books in the first place?
Well, what happened is that I was ordained for 6-7 years, and I began to realize in dealing with people, talking with them, they would come to me for help and counseling in what we call the Sacrament of Confession, where people come in with their issues, need forgiveness. And one of the things I realized, so much of what these people were talking about was a lack of understanding of their own humanness, of the goodness of the human person, the failure to be able to kind of see themselves in a more positive way, the negativity that so many of them had, sometimes seeing sin where there wasn't sin, it was just misunderstanding. These were the things that made me realize I need to get a degree in psychology and become a counselor. And even though it was a troubled road, because the community I belonged to was a missionary group, and they said, well, this isn't our work, but God blessed the superior I had at that time. He gave me the permission to go forward. And I really have to see that was the turning point in my life as a person and as a priest, because that opened up a whole vast area of people that not only to look at them from a human standpoint, emotional, intellectual, but also a spiritual. I just don't think that we can find healing unless we can find healing with the whole person. And I wanted to combine all of that because Jesus does in the scriptures. I mean, he's talking about the whole person there in everything. So I'm just kind of expanding on what he was giving us, and that has been so successful in reaching and touching people. But I owe it to God that he opened the door for me and I could go on. And I just realized through the affirmation of so many people that I knew I was touching them. So it's been an exciting journey for 55 years in the counseling and 60 years in the priesthood. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, thank you. It's such an honor to have you. And I'm just inspired by your journey. And I think you're spot on with that. I think a lot of times we like to separate faith and religion from psychology and being human. And I think that even when you look at the fact that God could have sent his son in any way to reach us, but he sent him in human form. And so that he could live through the emotions and the experiences that humans have. That to me is why Jesus can be so compassionate. And then because he experienced every single one of the emotions that humans experienced. And so if we look at how he dealt with his emotions, he didn't neglect them. Even when you look, when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, you would be better at quoting this than me, but he basically said, if there's any other way, but he still did. And in that we see Jesus in this really heightened emotional state, but still how he didn't neglect it. He embraced it. And so if we're to live the way that Jesus did as Jesus followers, then I think that we really need to look at that example.
Kirsten, you're right on. And just to know, young woman like you, who's reaching out to all the young people your age, it gladdens my heart to know that this message and this approach is going to be carried on. You know, I always look back and I thank the Holy Spirit time and time again, how he cleared the road for me to go on and to touch people and reach them. And my greatest affirmation was working with the people, seeing them healing, seeing them bringing the emotional and spiritual together. It's been a tremendous experience for me.
Yeah. I mean, even just reading your books about it, I've seen what incredible fruit it has brought and how it can bless so many people that are reading it. And you really do give so many practical ways in how we can deal with starting in healing emotions. What I loved about that is you go through every major emotion that we experience, and then you give biblical context, but then you also give practical tools of how we can deal with those emotions. And so one of the things that you have said is we're never going to be fully human until we're able to deal with anger, just as one of the examples of emotions. So what are some of the negative side effects by not dealing with or even repressing our emotions?
Well, the major side effect is that people feeling guilty for what they're feeling. That's almost a condemnation of our humanness. And Christ's birth, he's coming to teach us this. And I'm afraid that sometimes we celebrate the wonderful feast of Christ's birth, but we very often aren't getting the full message of what he's trying to tell us. Being human is wonderful. It's a gift. It's holy. And we have to appreciate it. And that's not what we're seeing and hearing in the world today, are we? And especially with so much of the type of thinking that has been going on. So that is where we grasping and helping people understand sin is not what we're feeling. We have to understand those feelings. Why am I feeling angry at this person? Why am I feeling disappointed this other person didn't say good morning to me? To understand all of that and not get caught up with sin there. That has really negated our humanness so much. We can feel anything, and to be comfortable with our feeling and learning how to express those feelings in an appropriate way. This is such a major problem in the thousands of people I've worked with, no matter how much education they have. And so that's what I'm hoping to be able to help so many as I have.
Yeah. And so many times I think our emotions are there. God gave us those emotions as indicators, right? Like for anger, for example, anger can be used in a good way. There's like the righteous anger of God. So seeing injustice and being angry by that, for example, is something that can then lead to action. And so I think like if we just say all emotions are bad, then that leads to, like you said, guilt, and it also denies our humanness. But if you can look at why am I feeling this anger, and then how can I communicate that effectively to, if it's a person making you angry, have you seen that a lot in your counseling, that people had a hard time dealing with their anger between one another?
Yes, I like the way you're putting that in place there, because the anger is probably the most misunderstood emotion of all of our emotions. Even when I listen on television, how many times, time after time after time, you hear anger put in a negative way? And to be able to understand, to express anger in an appropriate way is not only a gift, it's part of a good relationship. It's part of our own maturity. And to tell somebody, I'm angry with you because of the way you treated me in front of my friend last night, that opens up a whole door where the other person didn't even know that. And if I don't share that with them, they're going to walk around not knowing how I really felt, and it's going to affect me in my relationship with them. So when I can be honest with that person, why I was angry, it opens a new level in our relationship. It deepens a relationship. It doesn't block it. More relationships and marriages die because people don't understand the anger and they avoid it. And that silence is a real killer.
Yeah, absolutely. Because then it just lets those feelings and maybe misunderstandings fester. And the more that those sit and are not talked about, the more that we kind of believe our own narratives and the gap between us grows. And you actually talked in Healing Emotions about how confrontation, which what that is, if you have to talk to someone about how you're feeling, that's a confrontation. And I think a lot of times, especially me, I hate confrontation and I think it's something negative. But you talked about confrontation is actually part and linked to compassion. Can you explain a little bit more of what that means?
Yes. And confrontation, as you said, it's not something negative, it's something appropriate. It's something necessary, that we do it in an appropriate way so that the person understands that I don't agree with them and this is why, or whatever the difference may be. And I think it shows the fact that two people are going to build a relationship when they can allow one another to feel, to deal with the confrontation. And that doesn't mean I don't like you or I don't love you. In fact, it's a way people can grow together. Because unless I know you and I feel free enough to say these things, how are we going to develop? Silence is the real killer in our relationships when we don't share these things, especially anger. It builds up and builds up. It's a cancer to a relationship. Many relationships die, and people will tell me, and I can see the reason. They didn't share. They didn't take the risk. They were afraid to say, I'm angry about what you said to me, to that other person. Simple thing like that can destroy a possibility of a good relationship.
Yeah. I mean, anytime we are led to a place of not communicating with each other, there's going to be distance. And I think it's interesting when you look at our relationships with one another and then our relationships with God. Like for a while, I was scared that I didn't know how to pray the right way or that I wasn't praying the right way. And, you know, a lot of that comes down to like my perfectionism. And I've shared this on my podcast before, but I was diagnosed with OCD when I was a kid. And a lot of how that has manifested for me when I look back is scrupulosity. And I don't know if I pronounced that word correctly. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, you say scrupulosity. It actually, I had explained that word to a number of different counselors and psychologists. They didn't understand it. And, so it ties in a lot with a moral issue and so on and so forth. But you have it right. And a lot of people suffer from scrupulosity, but they don't even know it. So it's a word we have to bring out so people can sort out and understand their feelings much better.
Yeah, can you explain for anyone that's listening that might not know what that is, what that means?
Yes, if I tend to be scrupulous, it's got a lot to do with perfectionism. So if I feel angry towards you about something that you said to me, and I feel, well, this is my mother. I shouldn't feel angry towards my mother. That's wrong. So I keep it in and I don't express it. That damages the relationship that I have with my mother. because I'm not going to get close to her. I'm going to hide anger from her. And if I want to have a good relationship with my mother, I want to be, but because I have this scrupulosity, I shouldn't have this feeling towards my mother. It's nonsense. It's total misunderstanding about anger. Can you see how relationships just stop? And I picked this up so many times that people will go back why their relationship maybe with their mother is not as good as it was their father, because they held so much back over the years. They were afraid of their mother. That's not the way to develop a good relationship with the mother, right? See how it can get in there? So scrupulosity is making sin and evil over having an angry feeling towards my mother. And if I can bring it out, we can talk about it. And maybe I shouldn't even be angry at her because of what she's explaining, because it was a misunderstanding. Can you see the complexity of something like that can happen? Does that help you with understand that?
Yeah.
And people will say, I shouldn't be angry with God. If we can't be angry with God, then who can we be angry with?
Right. If anyone can handle our anger, it's him.
60-70% of the Psalms have anger towards God. And then as the Psalm goes on, we understand God better. Why? He doesn't mind if we're angry. In fact, God is described in the Bible. How many times he's described as anger? He's teaching us the goodness of our emotions, of our ability to be angry and express it in an appropriate way. It's a wonderful psychology book. The Old Testament, the New Testament doesn't make any difference. It's there. So if I can get some of this across to you and the audience, that would be wonderful. This is what scruple. I looked at a woman, and I had a certain sexual feeling towards her. That's not a sin. It's the attraction we would have towards the opposite sex. Learning how to deal with feelings like that. Learning how to be, I don't feel shame. It's a normal feeling to be attracted towards the opposite sex like that and to have those kind of feelings. They're good. I just have to learn how to accept them, express them in an appropriate way, and not be guilty. And if I'm guilty about that feeling, and at the end of the day I say, oh, I had 15 impure thoughts towards 15 different women just because I was attracted to them. Can you see how that can mess somebody's mind?
Oh, yeah. I can see it, and I've lived it because, when you're talking about OCD, with OCD, what happens is normal passing thoughts that someone might have throughout the day, like, oh, that person's attractive, but you move on with your day. For someone with OCD, you say, why did I have that thought? Oh my gosh, there must be something wrong with me. And then that's when they call it ruminating thoughts. Like the thought, I'm a bad person. This is not in alignment with my values. Because that's a lot of what OCD comes down to is like, we can't grapple with the fact that we have a passing thought that doesn't align with our values. And then I remember in Sunday school, actually, when I was a little girl, and this is before I was diagnosed with OCD, but I remember my teacher saying like how if you think about doing something, like if you think about killing someone, that's a sin. What I didn't realize what she was talking about, like if you're premeditating on it, I think was what she intended. But I heard that as if I have the thought enter my mind, then I'm sinning. And so I walked around as this little girl thinking that I was sinning because I was having these thoughts. And it's kind of like if you tell someone, don't think about this, then you're going to think about it. And it was torment for me. And it took...
Yes, everybody should go through a little scrupulosity, because unless you do, you don't understand it. I can't imagine a minister of God, a priest, or any minister not being able to see when a person talks about their feelings and their sins. They have to understand that. And sometimes the minister doesn't, because he doesn't understand scrupulosity. And it's torment. And it gets so bad that I've seen people walking around doing this to themselves. What they're doing, they're trying to push away the thought they have. And you can laugh at it, but it's very painful, because that people feels they're sinning. They shouldn't have that thought. And you will understand people like that.
And then by pushing that away, it's getting back to everything we were talking about earlier. It pushes away it denies our emotions. And then by denying our emotions, and I think a lot of times people think of religion as all these rules, and they don't understand the love and grace of Jesus, that even when we do sin, even when we have these thoughts, like, it's because we're human, but that we're forgiven and there's grace for that. And I think a lot of people feel alienated from religion because they think that they have to be perfect in every single way in order to be accepted. And so for me, growing up, when I was dealing with that scrupulosity and perfectionism, I thought that I wasn't praying the right way, that I didn't know how to properly communicate with God. So then that led me to not praying and to not communicating with God. And when you look at that, it's such a lie. Like, if we think of God as a father, any good father just wants to hear from his kids, right? And so God, I think, is the same. You just talking to him and expressing these thoughts and emotions. And if you can learn how to communicate with God in that way, then you can understand your emotions more. You mentioned the Psalms, how there is times where there is anger expressed, but then that led to this place of like relief and love and joy, and it reflects the whole emotional human experience. And then if you can have that in your spiritual life, then that can lead over to your relationships and learning how to then express negative feelings or uncomfortable confrontation in your relationship.
Very good. See, I can tell you had your problems with that, but you worked it out. You got some help. It's all cleared up. You can understand that. And a lot of people wrestle with that. You will understand people that have these kind of scrupulosity. It basically comes down to, we have to learn what are all our feelings, to allow ourselves to feel anything and to feel comfortable with it, and to not feel insecure that if I feel I'm going to kill that man, it's a feeling. I'm not going to kill it. The more secure I am with that feeling, the less chance I ever have of doing any harm to them. But to get comfortable with them and make them our own. People have a tremendous problem with this, and people don't talk about it. And it's a torment. And people feel that if I feel like I'm so angry, I want to just kill that man, they feel I'm a murderer. Something's wrong with me. No. I've had a lot of those. I've killed thousands of people over my lifetime with my thoughts. And I've killed none of them. But what it does, being Italian and having a family background where there was a lot of anger expressed, later on I look back at that and I realize, if trees could talk, they'd put me in prison of all the people I wanted to kill. So, but they get comfortable with those, and this is what a lot of people don't have. And when they bury them, this is when we run into problems. I think a lot of our struggle with the sexuality of what I am, and a lot of times I think too, because we haven't worked out those feelings, what has that done to us about saying what I am and what I am not? I think we have a lot of work to do in that area to feel that. Sometimes people are saying the struggles we have about, am I homosexual, not homosexual? If you're homosexual, fine, you have to accept that. That's who you are. But are you really homosexual? Or is it a thought you had of a desire sexually towards another a same-sex person? Does that make you a homosexual? No. But if you live with fear with that, how much of that gets in there? We haven't studied all of that. You see the complexity of being comfortable with my feeling. It's being comfortable with me and who I am.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's what, I think some of these negative emotions, and then shame comes in and tells us, and shame makes us feel small, makes us feel like we can't express these things. But if you can see it for what it is and learn how to deal healthily with those emotions, then like you said, those emotions will stay in their place and you'll see it for what it is, and they won't get the best of us. It's when we deny what we're feeling and we let shame win, then we have these slew of problems.
Well, the truth will set us free, Jesus said. If we can acknowledge we had that feeling and it's just a feeling, we're going to be in good mental and spiritual health. So a lot of mental and spiritual health is because people have never learned how to deal with their feelings. And especially if a family didn't allow one another to have feelings. Don't you feel angry at me? Or don't you express anger at me? I'm starting off life on the wrong direction already.
Right. And well, you bring up a good point, because I think a lot of times, and you mentioned this in your book, but how we fail to recognize and analyze generational patterns. Even if you say, I don't want anything to do with my family and the way that they acted, and you separate, still there's these generational patterns that will affect us in some way. Can you explain a little more about that?
I think a lot of times people have not learned how to deal with the anger, hate, disappointment with their parents, or if not with their parents, say their grandparents, and they haven't worked those things through. You know, they're going to move away from their parents and their grandparents, but they need to understand why they feel like that, with a disagreement that they have. It's a matter of just coming to grips and understanding that feeling. I don't have to separate myself from them. So many people who have separated themselves from their families, sometimes the separation is necessary, but we're talking about where it didn't really have to happen. It was a matter of not understanding their own feeling, and rather communicating with those people would make a big difference, right? As simple as this is, it can be very complex. I think the nature of the books with feelings is I tried to keep it as simple as possible, because if you get too technical, people don't understand it. It doesn't matter if you're a doctor or a lawyer and all the education. That's why I wrote the books and rewrote until I got them to where people are going to understand. It's okay to have this feeling and express it in an appropriate way. That's what maturity is. But that's what spirituality is. How do I rise above that anger? How do I work it out?
Yeah. And I think that when you're talking about people walking away from their family and keeping that distance, a lot of it comes down to forgiveness and also self-forgiveness. I think people that can't forgive themselves easily also then cannot forgive others. I know you talk about that a lot in both books, actually.
That's one of the hardest things I've asked people, especially in our sacrament in the Catholic Church, about, God has forgiven you now. And they say, yes. Now, can you forgive yourself? Oh, I couldn't do that. Are you making yourself greater than God? He forgives you and you can't forgive yourself. 90% of the time, that gets them. They realize the stupidity of what they're saying, because we need to forgive ourselves. If God forgives us, who are we not to forgive ourselves? And if we don't forgive ourselves, people will say, if he doesn't forgive himself, does he really forgive me? So there's a lot of neurotic type of thinking in these areas. I think there's some of the neurotic thinking we have in religion is unbelievable. And that's why people get twisted up with religion. And I remember speaking to a group of psychiatrists. I says, it's not religion that's neurotic, it's the way it was taught that's neurotic. And if we don't have clear psychological understanding of our human understanding, we project that into our religion, and that destroys healthy religion. And this is why Jesus expressed anger a number of times, right? And when he went into the temple, he was in control of himself, but he was trying to get a message across. If you want to get a message across to somebody, if you're anger and you're angry about this, they know how you really feel about that situation. But if you just kind of gloss over it, they may know you disagree, but they don't know the depth of your anger. And that makes the difference. If I
Right.
know you disagree is one thing, but if I know you're really angry about it, that puts it on another plane.
And on the flip, if you're angry all the time because you're emotionally unhealthy in that way, then no one takes you seriously when, yeah. So there's always nuance and like we need to understand the full spectrum of emotions so that we can express it properly and in a way that is indicative of what we're actually feeling.
Yes. And the two extremes are burying my anger, which is so destructive to me, not only psychologically and spiritually, but also physically. The body doesn't lie. All these things that go in our body, a lot of it is repressed anger. What does that do to our body? Or the other extreme is just overreacting, and I need to get control. But in the middle there, to be able to see the beauty and the healthiness of anger, it can change our vision of relationships, of one another, and also our vision of God. Because God in the Bible is described. It's amazing how emotions are a very important part of understanding God. He made us in his image and likeness. And the Bible expresses that time after time after time. And we still aren't listening.
Right. And well, when you look at the fact, like God created us with emotions for a reason, you know, he's not surprised by our emotions and it's actually a beautiful thing. And so I think kind of getting back to what you just were saying a minute ago about how we skew religion so much and it's actually not reflective of the heart of God. There's so many things that have been terrible things that have been done in the past in the name of Christianity that is actually not reflective of God. And so what that does is it hurts so many people, and understandably so, but then they don't want to come anywhere near it. And if we as Christians want to spread the gospel means good news. But a lot of times I think we fail to portray it as so. It's like if you're not perfect, then you don't belong. That's not good news, and that's actually not what God stands for.
And one of the most important aspects of learning how to accept ourselves is going to be we have to accept our feelings. If we don't feel comfortable with our feelings, how am I going to be comfortable with your feelings? And that's a relationship problem. And sometimes in a marital situation, we may be talking about their sexual relationship, and they're nervous about talking about it. I'm more comfortable than them. And I'm saying, why are you uneasy about talking about this? Is it any wonder they're having a problem in their marriage and their sexual relationship? They're not comfortable with the actual sexuality, which is good. Do they talk about it? No. They turn the lights out in their heart.
Yeah. And again, I think even in sexuality, especially like I've noticed people are scared to talk about it in church. But then that's also like adding shame to something that God created, right? Like he created us with sexual desires for a reason. And within the right context, it's a beautiful thing. But when we're told all the time, oh, this is bad, 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 don't think that, that's bad, then it creates, even when you get into a marriage, when you've been told your whole life that those things are bad, then you still are kind of carrying that shame and guilt for thinking that, even when it's within the context of what it was intended for.
I understand the people from my generation very well because I grew up in that generation where you shouldn't feel this, you shouldn't feel that. Pretty soon, you become dehumanized. You push all these things down under. You lose your humanness and your ability to be a free human person, to hug somebody. I remember my brother and I started to hug our father because he wasn't a hugger, because he was like a stick. And gradually, he began to hug us because we took away some of that shame he had about hugging his sons. You can see the complexity of the distortion that happens in the human person when we have all these mixed negative aspects about our humanness. Christ became a human person to teach us about God the Father and redemption and God's love and compassion, but he wanted to teach us about being human and accepting our humanness. And that's why I became a human person. But we still don't get the message at Christmas yet. Do we walk away more loving about our humanness? That's an interesting area, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I think you're talking about your generation and looking at my generation, we've gotten really in touch with our emotions, and people talk about therapy all the time. I don't know if that's just because I live in Los Angeles, but it's like almost like a trendy thing to have a therapist now. But so many times I see spirituality left out of that. And then on the other side, I see a lot of times in church, in religious context, then psychology left out of it. And like you said, when you look at Jesus, like it fused all those things together. That's not a coincidence. And so I think it's really powerful, the work that, and really ahead of your time too, to have had this journey and written these books and paved the way.
Do you think that even though people are more open today, the younger generation, towards having sexual relations, are they that open also about talking about their emotional feelings with one another?
I think yes, but I also think, and this is where I'm glad that you talk about, because obviously as a priest, like you incorporate the psychology into it. And now I'm seeing, as someone in an industry that is very secular and in a city that tends to be pretty secular, in Los Angeles, there's a lot of spirituality, but not necessarily Christianity. And one of the conversations I have a lot is a lot of my friends that consider themselves spiritual but not Christian, they think that it's just a difference of vocabulary. They just haven't had an encounter with Jesus, and that he's real and he's a person, and that the beauty of that to me is I have a roadmap. I have someone that walked ahead of me and that is ahead of me and is behind me and is beside me, that Jesus walked out and went through every single experience that I'm going to have. When I just think of like the universe or the spirituality or these vocab things that people that are spiritual but not Christian use, it's not personal. And so to answer your question, I think that people are better about talking their feelings, but now I think we've gotten so on the other end of the spectrum that then Jesus has been removed from that equation. And I've heard a quote one time of, we're all born with a God-filled void, and we will try to fill that void with a lot of other things, money, alcohol, sex, but we always come back feeling empty. Until we let ourselves be filled with God, those other things are never going to satisfy us. And so I think people have gotten really good at talking about their feelings, but now God is removed from it, so they don't understand why they still feel empty sometimes. And that's not from a place of judgment. Even sometimes there's times where I'm not talking to God as much as I should be about a situation, and I'm trying to go out in my own strength and figure out why I'm feeling a certain way. And for me, as a perfectionist, I'm like, if I just work harder and do better, then I'll feel better about myself. And that's removing God from the equation. And so I think we have gotten better about talking about our feelings, but I think we're never going to be perfect in it, but it's now convoluted in a different way.
And the whole aspect of intimacy, when we talk about intimacy, most people think about it only in terms of sexual intimacy. And real intimacy is emotional intimacy, that I can share all my feelings with this person. Sexual intimacy fits in within that. But if I don't have emotional intimacy, the sexual intimacy is going to die, because that emotional sharing has to be there. And you can see how many times people jump ahead of themselves, and that's why the relationship doesn't make it, which is a lesson I wish all of us have to learn.
Right. Because I mean it makes sense when you really think about it. It's, sexual intimacy is the most vulnerable you can be with another person. And so if you don't feel comfortable emotionally with them, something's not going to be right.
Yeah, the that aspect. I'm trying to remember what Saint Irenaeus said. It. This is in the 5th century. He said, "The glory of God is in the human person who is fully alive." And what he means by that, fully alive, is fully emotional. Now, that from somebody from the 5th century saying that, he was really ahead of his times with something like that. The challenge we all have is, how do we learn how to be comfortable with ourselves and our emotions and all of our feelings? We're free when we can do that. And that's the goal of becoming emotionally human, mature person. So I see we can see the struggles in here. That so many of the struggles that people have, they're in that emotional area. And the sad thing is that we have education for everything. In these areas, we have no education on a official way in schools and all that. The only education we get is what was our experience emotionally in our families. And nobody has perfect families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're all human. So even the best intending parents there's gonna still be some form of trauma that we carry because we are raised by imperfect, no pun intended, humans. Yeah.
But that whole emotional area is such a challenge for all of us, especially in our day, with all hatred and everything's going on. People really down deep underneath, they're not comfortable with their feelings. They've never learned how to deal with hate feelings, anger feelings. And if you don't deal with them, they're going to deal with you.
Yeah. And I think additionally, now we have so much stimuli around us and we have access to more information than ever. My pastor actually talked about this recently in a sermon, but he said, with our phones and our access to everything going on constantly around the world, we've almost become close to omniscient when we weren't created to be omniscient. Like the only one that actually has the emotional capacity to carry knowing about everything is God. And now because we know so much, we're learning more at a quicker rate than our emotions can necessarily keep up with. And
very well put.
Yeah, and especially, actually, I was listening to a podcast yesterday between Oprah and a woman named Brene Brown. And Brene Brown just came out with a book called Atlas of the Heart. And it's all about how we don't have the language necessarily to explain our emotions. She surveyed a bunch of people, and most people on average only could articulate 3 emotions: happy, sad, and angry.
Yeah, we need the words to identify them. That whole thing about what we're feeling emotionally. This is how we grow. What makes a wonderful author is that he can explain the human situation in an emotional dynamic, and so that people pick that up. I rewrote those 2 books over and over and over and over again. I drove my secretary nuts because I wanted to make sure that that feeling aspect was understood. Because I wrote the books, the first book, after 25 years of counseling, because I realized the enormity of the problems and misunderstanding and acceptance of our emotions. And until we can accept that, we can't accept ourselves. I think it's in the 2nd book where I write the most important relationship is the one with ourselves. When we're really comfortable with ourselves and know ourselves and understand our emotions and all of that, that good relationship there prepares us for a good relationship in marriage. That is where it is. And when I did marriage preparation, I did quite a few for a number of years. I worked in this area. I gave them extra time to work on that. And that's why at this point, I've had very few divorces with the marriages that I prepared,
Wow.
And that says something about that emotional dimension.
Yes, that's beautiful. And it also, I got so excited when I was reading, it was in Healing Wounded Emotions, and I came across this passage and I was like, this is the mission statement I feel like behind my podcast as well, because I talk about how I started this podcast because I wanted to share what I was learning about human trafficking. And I didn't necessarily want the whole podcast to be just about human trafficking because it's very heavy. And I also think it's irresponsible to tell people to care about these really deep issues of other people if I'm not equipping them in the same time to deal with themselves and fill themselves up to then be able to take on those other things. Because I've learned in my experience and the work I've done with anti-human trafficking is if I don't take care of myself and my emotions and how that's affecting me, I can never actually truly help other people. And so that's the heart behind this podcast.
You're hitting the nail right on the head.
Yeah, and you said it in similar words. So I just wanted to share that excerpt from Healing Wounded Emotions.
Wonderful. You're the bestseller for my book, that's for sure, on all of that. Because I must say, you must have read the books over and over because you really have grasped the core that I'm trying to get across. And that's not easy because a lot of times people just can't. Men have a much more difficult time than women do. And I always say that mothers have to teach their young men this, and wives have to teach their husbands about the emotional thing, because on that the balance of relationships is at stake.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to read this quote out loud. It said, this is in your words, you said, all the deliberations and reflections on compassion and sensitivity will never amount to much if we lack a sense of self. We must first be in touch with our own inner world, our pain, anxieties, anger, hurt, conflict, confusion, doubts, fears, all of them. Until we can experience and savor these feelings in ourselves, sensitivity and compassion towards others will never be attained. And so that kind of reflects what we were just saying, but I also think that's part of the issue too in today's world. There's so much polarization and division and pointing fingers at other people, but we can't look in the mirror at ourselves. And you talk about the difference between self-condemnation and self-criticism in your book. Can you explain why it's actually good to do that inner work and self-criticize and how that's different than self-condemnation?
When I can look at myself, and this changed through my life, that I can look at something that I didn't like, or I made a mistake, and I'm not hard on myself. I kind of just understand how it happened and what I have to do, and I learn from it. And I'm not condemning myself. I don't feel guilt and shame. But in the earlier part of my life, I could remember I would be very critical. I made that mistake. I'm no good. And I'm beating myself up. One of the things that in counseling that is so prominent is self-condemnation, self-hate, negativity about themselves. Is it any wonder that they can't find happiness? They're living in a turmoil of misunderstanding about being human.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think if we have that self-condemnation, and we're so much more likely then to have issues with others. And, in the Bible, it says, love others as you love yourself. If you don't love yourself well, you actually can't love other people well. And so I think that it's all connected. The more that we can do the work to understand our feelings and come to peace with those feelings and not beat ourselves up about it. Another excerpt that you had was holding on to guilt implies a perfectionism that is unchristian, unrealistic, and as such destructive. And I think that that spirit of perfectionism and guilt and condemnation towards ourselves will spill out into how we treat other people.
You're right. And it's so self-destructive. That chapter on the most important person, the most important relationship is the one with yourself. I make people sometimes read it over time and time and time again, because it's unless you can understand that, you're not going to be able to understand these other people. And you're not going to be able to understand what we mean by getting close to one another in a marriage. That is so important, that relationship with ourselves. And people don't understand that when I say it. They kind of just don't. And am I comfortable with everything?
Mm-hmm. And I think maybe the reason why they don't understand it is because, to your point, what you mentioned before, is we've never been told how to deal with our emotions. We've never been, and so it is such an alien concept to many people, because we're told to keep it all together, to push our emotions down, just put a smile on, and even on social media, like, show your highlight reel. No one sees that inner turmoil, and so I think when you don't see any healthy examples of that, it can be very confusing.
And healthy religion should make us have healthy concepts of ourselves. When religion doesn't give us that, then something's wrong with the way that religion is being taught, especially our Christian understanding of, what Christ says. And that is so many people have drifted away from religion because they only see negative condemnation. And that's not what Christ taught. Right. That's been the misrepresentation of Christ, which, I'm sure he's not a happy camper about that, the way that has been brought across. But that understanding, I always say, we got to feel good about ourselves, that we hug ourselves and roll on the floor about it, that we're happy with ourselves. And a lot of times, we all need time with ourselves to be able to reflect on what's going on and to feel good with ourselves. Some people can never be alone. They just can't learn how to feel comfortable because of a lot of things they probably have to work out. But that's our goal, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And learning to be vulnerable with yourself. I think a lot of times people are scared of vulnerability, and people are scared of what they feel, because, I another quote from Brene Brown is, she said, perfectionism is a defense mechanism against shame. That healthy striving comes internally, and perfectionism is externally motivated, that you won't have any kind of shame. And so I think if we're not willing to be vulnerable, it's because we're afraid of our humanness and, like, the messy, like, kind of ugly parts of being human, that we don't want to sit with ourselves and really examine what's in there, because if we're not, then we might have to come to terms with the fact that we're not perfect, which, spoiler alert, we're not.
That's why healthy shame and healthy guilt, if we can feel them and get in them and understand them, we can learn so much and grow beyond that. Because they help us. They give us boundaries.
Right.
Healthy guilt and healthy shame.
Yeah.
When somebody has no healthy guilt and healthy shame, there's something inhuman about them.
Right.
I mean, they have no boundaries, right?
Right. And boundaries is also something, and we could do a whole podcast topic on boundaries, but as a counselor, how have you seen, maybe in relationships where people don't have healthy boundaries set, how that has affected them? Is that something that you've noticed a lot?
Yes, that they don't have healthy boundaries, and in terms of what they say to people, how they approach people. They realize they hardly know somebody, and they make statements and or ask questions that are way out of. They don't have a boundary. They don't have boundaries within themselves, so they don't have boundaries with others. In other words, they make people feel uncomfortable because of that.
Right.
The little example of the mother saying, "Your brother got angry when you went into his room. Why do you think that was?" "Well, I don't know." "Well, that's his room. You can't go in there unless you ask him, 'Can I come in there?'" And that's a little. It's a simple thing that every family and parents have had to deal with, but it's very important that I have to realize, right? Unless I invite him in, I just can't go walking in on him.
Right. And like you said, it's usually reflective of the lack of boundaries that you have. If, if I let people like walk all over me or whatever that is, or if I don't give myself the space to have my boundaries, then I most likely will be violating other people's boundaries without knowing it. So it all comes back to that getting used to ourselves so that we can be.
So many people have been violated in our society because we don't, and so we have a lack of respect and for one another because we have no boundaries how we treat one another. But that's saying about myself, then I don't have any boundaries in me. So how can I understand the boundaries of the other person that is there? This area here is flagrantly, destructive in our society today. With that we need to work with.
Absolutely. And I think technology and having the ability to hide behind screens only makes that worse because I think it, in a way, out of like cowardice, people feel more comfortable violating other people's boundaries or maybe saying hateful things when they don't have to say it face to face. And so I see even on social media in the comment section of like people's posts, like people can be really vicious. And I think it's, it all does come from that place of that person feeling hurt in some way and not being healthy themselves, that then they project that onto other people. So
people that are so vicious and destructive, what must be the hate and the anger that they feel in themselves that they've never resolved or that people did to them and they never worked it through? And it talks about the terrible damage inside that person that they have to act that out, that they can't and they can't even acknowledge it. And it's shame upon shame upon shame. That is so. And this is a lot that we're seeing today that we have to kind of come to grips with. I will often hold the door for anytime a woman's coming by. I think it's just natural. And they'll walk through and they'll say, thank you. And I'll say to the woman, chivalry is not dead. And 9 out of 10 of them will stop and start talking to me about the lack of kindness and gentleness. And they all have a story about that. It's interesting that young and old and little, they'll all say something.
Mm-hmm. It's, there's a lot in the world right now that is really overwhelming, I think, and there's a lot of division and hatred and darkness, but there's always hope, and it always comes back to doing the inner work on ourselves and with God, and then we can go out and be the change, be the person to hold the door, be the person to smile at someone. And the more that we do that, the more that we will see that change that we want to see. And like I said, I'm really grateful that you have these resources laid out of like all of your years and years of work for us to kind of study and learn from other people's mistakes and learn how to really deal with our emotions in a way that we haven't been taught before, so that we can then go out into the world and actually help other people and be kind to other people.
Very well put. If I can change myself and how I deal with something that was done against me, because I can influence the other person. I have seen marriages change where I've only dealt with one person because I got that person to help to always realize, look at myself. What did I do that hurt that person? How could I do it differently? How did I handle when they, said something wrong? All the change came there. I can't tell you how many times I've seen the other person change, and I never met that other person because this person, this man, this woman changed in how they were going to deal with things, not changing somebody else. How do I change myself? And I have to do that without feeling I'm putting myself down. I'm no good. Look what I did wrong. It's a learning experience, not a hate experience. It's a learning. How do I change and dealing with that person? It works miracles.
Right. Wow, that's very powerful and really encouraging too to I'm sure anyone listening that might feel, because I think a lot of times at the end of the day and where we see a lot of anger in today is that people feeling like they can't change other people, or and things are so polarized, especially in the United States, because people are like, you can't understand me and my point of view. But if we would just look in the mirror and look at the ways that we could be better ourselves, and maybe there would be that bridge between that massive gap that we see. And so
That's right. Very well put on all of that.
Thank you.
In these areas here. This is we can change the world, and we can have influence others. How do I change in dealing with the things that are out there that are wrong, or people have affected me? How am I going to handle it? Like the simple thing I used to teach a little boy that people were, his friends were picking on him. And I just told them to say, tell them, when you call me a name, I feel hurt. And that did it. And they walked away. And I can't tell you how many little boys and girls were able to do that were being abused by words from their so-called friends.
Yeah. Well, I'm just like, there's so much that we've talked about today that I'm like, I want to respect your time, and I want to kind of wrap things up just to leave listeners with something. We talked about a lot of things. If you could leave listeners with one takeaway, just based on everything that we said today, what would it be?
I think the most important thing, there's a number of wonderful things there, but I think that whole thing, to be able to appreciate the feelings I have, to know what I'm feeling, not to be afraid of it, to understand those feelings, to realize they're good. Feelings are all good. They're my feelings. I own them. And no matter what they are, how positive or negative, to be able to feel comfortable with every feeling. I will be in control of my life. I will not hurt others then. I will be able to understand my feelings and to be in control of them and express them in an appropriate way. That probably could change the world.
Yes, absolutely. Amen. That is a great place to end. Yes. And Father, I am just so grateful for you just sharing your wisdom with everyone here, not only today, but in your books and just your life's work. You've just impacted so many people. I've seen it firsthand, and just what Lisa and my dad have spoken so highly of you, and it's just been so great to connect with you. So thank you so much. I want to just share again your books. For anyone listening, the first is Healing Wounded Emotions, and then Healing Wounded Relationships is the sequel to that. Is there anywhere else, Father, that they can connect with you and your ministry?
It's fatherpadovani.com.
Okay, great. And there's links to all of your books on there, and anyone listening, you can order that there. And I will also add it in the show notes as well, so everyone knows the spelling.
And I want to thank you. I am amazed how you have touched the heart of both those books. And I feel somebody's going to carry this on. You and many of the other people but it's people like you that are going to touch many others. I feel I can leave this world realizing somebody's going to, and expand on what I tried to do. Thank you so much. And I hope we can get together again.
Me too. Thank you. And the honor is all mine. And I really, really appreciate just everything that you do. And like I said, when I was reading your books, I was like, I feel like you are articulating a lot of what I've felt. And so it's just, I was just as honored. And like I said, it's such a pleasure. So thank you.
I have cloned you. God bless you.
Thank
God
you.
bless you. Thanks. And keep up the wonderful work with the people of your age group. We need all of them. And if they can have this, they will bring people to God.
Yeah, amen. And thank you again. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next week.